the other side of this Supreme Court coin that we're talking about is going to take a lot more peeling back, because it really, again, speaks to the sensibilities of a lot of people in this country, not just conservative folks, but a lot of people who don't understand affirmative action. So we're going to educate you today about what that was, who actually benefited from it, and really what we've lost here. First, I want to say that Clarence Thomas is super whack. He doesn't speak for us. He's not that dude. And you'll see why we say that. Also, I want to make sure that I say that the Supreme Court is not necessarily the be all and end all. There are checks and balances in government so that no one branch has supreme authority in perpetuity. Okay. You, by listening to the show like this, and I'm sure you listen to other programming and you seek out ways to become a better human being. First off, I applaud you, but you're the sort of person that needs to influence your social circles so that people can think critically about things. And hopefully we'll kind of give you some perspective today. I'm going to read from NPR. In a historic decision, the U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday effectively ended race-conscious admissions programs at colleges and universities across the country. In a decision divided along ideological lines, the six-justice conservative supermajority invalidated admissions programs at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. The decision reverses decades of precedent upheld over the years by narrow Supreme Court majorities that included Republican-appointed justices. It ends the ability of colleges and universities, public and private, to do what most say they still need to do: consider race as one of the many factors in deciding which of the qualified applicants to be admitted. Chief Justice John Roberts, a longtime critic of affirmative action programs, wrote the decision for the court majority, saying that the nation's colleges and universities must use colorblind criteria in admissions. Oh, if only that were true. Real quick before I keep reading. Using colorblind admissions criteria does not deal with, like, at Harvard, we're going to talk about this. Harvard, 43% of the people that attend Harvard are legacy attendees.
Can you explain to our audience what that means?
So if your dad went to Harvard, there's like a preferential treatment for you if you're an applicant. I believe effectually that's what it is. Don't hold me to it. If you want more exact,
I mean, it's nepotism,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
As a legacy, yes, my parents went to school here,
right?
So I get to go to school here,
right? Add to that the life-based circumstances that really need to line up for there to be impactful, meaningful numbers. Not like, okay, we let 3 Black people in this year and the class is 50,000 people. You know what I'm saying? For there to be impactful numbers that really make a difference, and we're not attaining progress according to anyone else's timetable, but indeed our own Black people's timetable. These things need to be addressed. This is not just a Harvard thing. This is a thing with our corporate culture in this country, with law enforcement. I believe it's like 65% of all police officers are white men. Judges, same thing, on and on and on. This is when people talk about systemic issues, systemic racism, that these are issues that privilege white people and really prevent barriers to Black people. And they operate more or less in perpetuity, unless unchecked by something a la affirmative action. Okay, I'll keep reading. The majority opinion says, quote, many universities have for too long concluded wrongly that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, but skills built or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. Okay. Now,
what does he think has been happening?
right. It's like turning a blind eye, your own privilege, your own how these things help you. But when it becomes formalized for the benefit of someone else who is seeking to kind of equal things out, there's some equity built into the equation, equitable treatment, if you will. Then all of a sudden it's whoa, we can't have this. In other words, I've said it recently on the show too, and I really need to get this quote right, but to the privileged, equality feels like oppression. So that's kind of what the
idea that these admissions offices have been admitting people just because they're Black is such a ridiculous thing to think, especially for a Supreme Court justice who either knows better, right, and is shaping this false narrative intentionally, or doesn't, and therefore is drastically underqualified to be a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, this is where we're going with this. But they still ignore their perch, right? They ignore where they stand and how they got there. And then they look at other people and, okay, well, affirmative action is unconstitutional. Well, then we have 400 years of unconstitutional behavior in this country that we need to remedy, because now the systems are built and they're self-refueling and self-perpetuating.
I have to think, right? And I have to say the word think because I know, but I have to say the word think.
Sure.
That he understands that even with affirmative action, it didn't flip in our favor.
Yeah. We're not.
Affirmative action did not turn us into the majority.
Yeah. I didn't graduate from Harvard.
Even those that did were the minority at Harvard.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like by a lot.
And I think your point that you made earlier is that to graduate from Harvard, you can't just show up and be Black and that's it.
You have to be exceptional first.
Right. So this is just making sure that exceptional Black people were included among the ranks.
To make sure that exceptional Black people were considered.
Considered, yeah.
It didn't assure you were admitted. You got a chance to apply.
Yeah, and be taken seriously. It's like,
how dare you?
Do you remember what
a chance?
You're going to help me explain this. Do you remember what happened with the football people when they were trying to hire Black coaches, but they weren't really trying to hire them?
Well, it's not what happened past tense.
So tell us about the story.
The Rooney Rule in the NFL. I don't even know if if it's still a thing because it's proven to be so ineffective. But the Rooney Rule made it so that when hiring a head coach, you had to interview a Black candidate. It did not require that you hired them. And it's been a failure because they'd invite someone like Ramses, someone like Q, to say they met that very, very low standard. We interviewed a Black guy. Now we're going to hire the person we wanted to hire anyway. And now, even though the majority of the players are Black, they pretend that there is not a pipeline for there to be Black people in charge in the head coach position or the general manager position, which are the people who make the decisions and pretty much run these franchises. So these things are created because left to their own decisions, a lot of people would not even consider Black people for these opportunities.
Okay. Thank you.
So these rules had to be instituted just for us to be considered.
So watch this. Again, it's hard for them to look at themselves with that same level of critical thinking, right? They're like, well, I got here honestly.
Well, they have the false. There's this false idea that this country is a meritocracy, where if you're better or smarter, bigger or faster, then you win. And we know better.
Yeah.
We have thousands of years that show us that that's not the case.
Not even remotely true. Yeah.
Left to our own devices, we are not fair, especially here.
Yeah.
my kid was smart, so he got in. You don't think it helps that that building's named after you, sir?
Yeah, there's more to it than just that. There's lots of smart people. But the hypocrisy is on full display. And it nowhere is it on better display than with Clarence Thomas. I remember when we went to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and they had this huge photo of Thurgood Marshall. There was this huge celebration of Ketanji Brown Jackson. And then they had this little tiny picture of Clarence Thomas because he is Black and he is on the Supreme Court. That's technically true, but there was no celebration in the way that there was Thurgood Marshall and Ketanji Brown Jackson. Now, you could say he was the first Black woman. He was the first Black Supreme Court justice. Clarence Thomas fell in the middle. Oh, he doesn't, he's not really breaking new ground here. But I think that.
I mean, what you just said is the point, though. How are you not breaking new ground? Like, how did you get there and decide status quo is fine? Like, that's the problem. That's why there's no celebration.
Sure.
Like, how do you, from where you're from, get there, a place that should have felt impossible to get to, and then say, all right, my work here is done.
And for those of you listening who don't know where Clarence Thomas is from and his story, we're gonna share that with you. Actually, let's just do it right now. Let's share it right now. So we have a clip from
Stephen A. Smith.
So go ahead and play that clip.
Devout Catholic, originally intended to be a priest, actually decided not to be that, by the way, because he became frustrated over the church's insufficient attempt to combat racism. Ended up attending Yale Law School via affirmative action. He attended law school. He was an affirmative action student. Gets better. Appointed by Ronald Reagan as chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This man once oversaw the EEOC. The very job he held was to address racial inequality in this country. He made it to the Supreme Court. Second Black in the history of the Supreme Court. His predecessor was the great Thurgood Marshall. I could easily go into Clarence Thomas. And I think Dr. Michael Eric Dyson put it best. He said, this is the face of a man who climbed the ladder of affirmative action to his present perch of power, only to help destroy the very ladder on which he ascended. You used affirmative action to climb the ladder that you climbed to success, and then did everything you could to knock it down so nobody else could come up the same way you did. That is Clarence Thomas.
Okay. Now, I want to read a quote from Clarence Thomas, or read a passage here. Justice Clarence Thomas took the unusual step of reading from the bench parts of his lengthy concurring opinion, meaning he was on the side of people trying to gut affirmative action. Thursday's decision, he wrote, sees the university's admissions policies for what they are: rudderless, race-based preferences. Those policies fly in the face of our colorblind Constitution. Okay. So Justice Clarence Thomas actually read that. Okay. Now, there are people that will say, listen, man, that's Black people, Black people's problem, Black people's issue. What does that have to do with me? Okay. Well, there's more to this story. Okay. Because affirmative action didn't just help Black people. Okay. There's a lot more here. And by the way, there's a good friend of the show and a good friend of me and Q, Isaac Hayes III, the son of the great Isaac Hayes, the singer, and the owner, founder,
singer, composer, writer, director, producer, Isaac Hayes.
Yeah. And Isaac Hayes III is the owner and founder of Fanbase, the social media app that Q and I are big fans of. If you're not a big fan of Twitter or really algorithms and all kind of nonsense, Fanbase is where you belong. The owner and the founder of Fanbase, Isaac Hayes, put up a post recently that said that this effort of the Supreme Court to gut affirmative action goes all the way back to 2016. And he says, but you didn't vote, though. Right. And so, again, we're talking about voting. And earlier, when we talked about what the Supreme Court did that was good, hopefully, in upholding, or rather pushing back against people's right or states' rights to gerrymander away the influence of the black vote. Voting matters. And for everyone who thinks that your vote doesn't matter, it does, because it was a conservative president that stacked a now conservative Supreme Court that now has taken away abortion. They've taken away affirmative action, as we've discussed. They have taken away protections against our LGBTQIA plus brothers and sisters. They've taken away, listen, if you have student loans, the current president was trying to forgive $20,000 of student loans for everybody.
$50,000.
50,000 was it? Okay. $50,000 of student loans. So if you have student loans, the government or the president had a plan in place to forgive that. That would have made a real measurable impact on you and your life and your immediate here and now. The same government that forgave all those pandemic loans, okay, they have the capacity to do so. The ship hasn't sunk and all those pandemic loans were forgiven, but this is for every man. This isn't for business owners. This isn't for, this is for you. If you have student loans or people that you might know, right? The same Supreme Court pushed back on those efforts. And now the presidential administration underneath Joe Biden has to find another way to deliver that relief to the American public. So your vote shapes outcomes. Absolutely. And Isaac Hayes was right.
I want to read something before we move on. This is from The Onion. This is by Cicero Thompson. I decided to become a slave so one day my descendants could steal college admission spots. Affirmative action in the world of higher education can be an incredibly difficult topic to address. While many people have strong opinions about how the policy affects race and college admissions, I, as an enslaved person, have uniquely personal ties to the issue. Back in the year 1823, I decided to become a slave. So one day, my descendants could steal college admission slots. Now, it was a tough decision, but boy, did it pay off big time. When I opted to become a slave and work in cotton fields in South Carolina, I did it with hope that in 200 years, my progeny would have an unfair advantage while applying to colleges. Deep down, I knew that if I sold my body and worked for no pay at the hands of my sadistic, violent master, then one day, my great-great-great-great-grandchild would be able to prevent some middle-class white kid from getting into their dream school. Sorry, Colton. Thanks to me, your 1530 SAT score won't be enough. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was living in Senegal, free and happy, but then I had an idea. What if I got on a ship and went to a land I'd never heard of, a place where I knew no one, did not speak the language, and spent 16 hours a day doing forced labor while getting whipped and beaten? Yes, I thought, if that's what it takes for my progeny to bump someone just as deserving from the admissions list, I'll do it. It was the perfect plan. If I played my cards right, I could all but ensure that my descendants would apply to schools, give the college no choice but to admit them, and force some so white kids into their second or third choice schools. Now, folks, there's more to read, and I hope you've caught on by now.
Sarcastic.
That this is sarcastic isn't even the right word, but that this is written to be heard as ridiculous.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you shared that with us. I want us to play a video just to leave you with some final thoughts. This video comes from Kasim Rashid. So let's fire that one off.
Here's the thing that MAGAs don't seem to understand about affirmative action. It was never about admitting unqualified Black kids. It was always about ensuring that qualified Black kids could actually get a fair shake at admission. MAGAs want us to forget at the levels of systemic racism in universities. I mean, my God, do they realize that HBCUs exist specifically because after graping enslaving, murdering, lynching, and torturing Black people for 400 years, they wouldn't even allow Black children to read a book. So Black people had to build their own schools. And for those claiming that systemic racism is over, when? When did those systems of white supremacy stop? Because right now, Black and brown schools get 23 billion less in funding than white schools, despite serving the same number of students. Because even now, 43% of white students at Harvard are there only because of legacy, and 3/4 of them would not have qualified on merit, meaning they took a seat from a more qualified Black, Asian, or white student. And spare me the MAGAs who say we had to repeal affirmative action because it's discriminatory to Asians. No, first of all, Asians also benefited from affirmative action. And moreover, is this the same GOP that near unanimously voted to block a resolution condemning anti-Asian discrimination? The actual unqualified admission you should be upset about are people like Justice Kavanaugh getting into Yale on legacy. The bottom line is this: don't blame Black people for your own mediocrity.